Okay, so today we're going to receive a lecture on Charles Wright's collection of poetry, Chickamauga. Just wanted to cover some housekeeping from this lecture's outset. So the schedule is changing a bit because of Victoria Day. I had emailed everybody concerning this, but I'll just reiterate it here. Today is May 19th. The essay on Chickamauga, sorry, on Here Bullet was due on May 18th, but I pushed it to May 19th today at midnight, Tuesday, due to Victoria Day. And also, we were supposed to have an open-ended question. Let's see, that was on. I pushed that to today as well. I'm pushing that till May 21st, which is this Thursday. We're gonna have the open-ended question. I'll post to the Blackboard. I'll email everybody informing them that it has been posted. So let's take a look at Chickamauga. Charles Wright is often ranked as one of the best American poets of his generation. Born in 1935 in Pickwick Dam, Tennessee, Wright attended Davidson College in the Iowa Writers Workshop. Iowa Writers Workshop is one of the most prestigious workshops in the United States, in the world for that matter. And many famous poets, creative writers, novelists, people who craft creative nonfiction, memoirists, uh, come out of the tradition that is the Iowa Writers Workshop. In 2014, oh sorry, he also served 4 years in the U.S. Army, and it was while stationed in Italy that Wright began to read and write poetry. He is the author of over 20 books of poetry. In 2014, he was named Poet Laureate of the United States. This volume, Chickamauga Wright's 11th book of poetry, is a vivid, contemplative, far-reaching, yet wholly plain-spoken collection of poems appearing as lenses through which to see the world beyond our moments. Chickamauga is also a virtuoso exploration of the power of concision in lyric poetry, a testament to the flexible music of the long line Wright has made wholly his own. As a reviewer in Library Journal noted, quote, Wright is one of those rare and gifted poets who could turn thought into music. Following his self-prescribed regimen of, we're going to get some weird terms here, but this is the way the person describes the methodic approach that Wright uses with regard to poetry. Purgatio means to cleanse, illuminato, to illuminate or shed light on, and contemplatio, to survey or contemplate on. Wright spins one lovely lyric after another on such elemental subjects as sky, trees, birds, months, and seasons. But the real subject is the thinking process itself and the mysterious alchemy of language. Quote from Chickamauga, the world is a language we never quite understand, unquote. So mentioned here is the idea of a lyric poem, but what exactly is lyric poetry? Here's a working definition. And I'm just reading this from a handbook of literature. So lyric poetry, a brief, subjective poem strongly marked by imagination, melody, and emotion, in creating a single unified impression. The early Greeks distinguished between lyric and choral poetry. Lyric was the expression of the emotion of a singlet accompanied by a lyre. This distinction has now disappeared, although the conceptions of the lyric as individual and personal emotion still holds and is one of the bases for discriminating between the lyric and other poetic forms. No longer primarily designed to be sung to an accompaniment, the lyric nevertheless is essentially melodic because the melody may be secured by a variety of means. Subjectivity is also an important element of a form that is the individual expression of personal emotion imaginatively phrased. It partakes in certain high examples of the quality of ecstasy. Okay, I think the idea of entering the emotion imaginatively is a great, and the music on the line that is a great sort of characterization, I think, of Charles Wright's work, especially within Chickamauga. With specific regard to Wright's collection, it's vital to look out for moments the speaker and the poet alike are grappling with such large topics as age, time, memory, the blending of Eastern and Western philosophy, which I think he does remarkably, the beauty and dynamism of nature, and the simple yet complicated state of humanity, to name a few. Let's take a look at some of his poetry. Okay, let's take a look and read aloud the first poem of this collection in the first section, entitled Sitting Outside at the End of Autumn. 3 years ago, in the afternoons, I used to sit back here and try to answer the simple arithmetic of life, but never could figure it. This object and that object never contained the landscape, nor all of its implications. The tree and that shrub never completely satisfied the sum or quotient I took from or carried to. Nor do they do so now, though I'm back here again, looking to calculate, looking to see what adds up. Everything comes from something. Only something comes from nothing. Lao Tzu says, more or less. Eminently sensible, I say, rubbing this tiny snail shell between my thumb and two fingers, delicate as an earring. It carries its emptiness like a child it would be rid of. I rub it clockwise and counterclockwise, hoping for anything, resplendent in its vocabulary or disguise. But one and one make nothing, he adds, endless and everywhere, the shadow that everything casts. Okay, there's a great deal going on in this poem, all of which are working to make it a great success, I feel. Firstly, we get some great moments where Wright is binding the poem to itself. That is to say, he's using math as a binding agent with such words as arithmetic of life. Never completely satisfied the sum or quotient, though I'm back here again looking to calculate and looking to see what adds up. This is both a way for the poet to structure the poem, but also a way to convey to us that the speaker and the poet alike are attempting to solve a problem of sorts, not the mathematics of a classroom, but the mathematics of life, attempting to answer those questions. Reoccurring motif of language, as we see with these mathematical words, also is a way to keep the poem in motion, a wheel of sorts that once you set it in motion, you can avoid inertia by spinning the wheel, not every line, but once every now and again. And we get that with the reoccurrence of the mathematical language. Notice too, Wright's tinkering with the line spacing, seemingly every stanza, most likely to manipulate sound with the quietness of the white space, or to throw into sharp relief the meaning encompassed within those lines that are set aside. Okay, within the very same poem, Sitting Outside at the End of Autumn, we get an allusion to Lao Tzu, this postmodern stroke, right, referring to this individual from the past. But who is he? Laozi, as he's called, which literally translates to old master, also rendered as Lao Tzu, who was an ancient Chinese philosopher and writer. He is the reputed author of a text called the Tao Te Ching, the founder of the philosophical Taoism and a deity in religious Taoist and traditional Chinese religions. As semi-legendary figure, Lao Tzu was usually portrayed as a 6th century BC contemporary of Confucius, but some modern historians consider him to have lived during the Warring States period of the 4th century BC. A central figure in Chinese culture, Lao Tzu is claimed by both the emperors of the Tang dynasty and the modern people of the Li surname as a founder of their lineage. So Wright is in accessing Lao Tzu is most likely to accessing his most noted work, the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is a fundamental text for both philosophical and religious Taoism. It also strongly influenced other schools of Chinese philosophy and religion, including legalism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, which was largely interpreted through the use of the Taoist words and concepts when it was originally introduced in China. Many artists, including poets, such as Charles Wright, painters, calligraphers, and gardeners have used the Tao Te Ching as a source of inspiration. And surely we know that Charles Wright is doing the very same thing. Its influence has spread widely outside East Asia and is among the most translated works in world literature. So, in an upcoming essay, one could easily make strong connections between all the Chinese philosophers and slash poets Wright incorporates into Chickamauga in order to infuse meaning by way of these artifacts from the past, a postmodern literary dictum, as we know. Also, one could question and search out as to why Wright dedicated nearly every poem of the collection's first section to various Chinese philosophers slash poets in accessing Lao Tzu, as we see here, Tu Fu, as we're going to see, Wang Wai, and Li Po. Okay, to take Charles Wright's poem, Sitting Outside at the End of Autumn, one step further, we're just layering the meaning that we can take from this and comparing it to other texts and other pieces of literature and other artifacts from the past. And one way to do that is to attempt to connect it, and I think it marries up well to James's Wright's work. They're not related. James Wright was a very famous poet. He eventually succumbed to mouth cancer, dying tragically in his early 50s. But he won Pulitzer Prize for his collective work and was a brilliant poet. So we get the comparison here between Sitting Outside at the End of Autumn, and I try to connect it to Lying in a Hammock at William Duffy's farm in Pine Island, Minnesota. Here we go. Over my head, I see the bronze butterfly asleep on the black trunk, blowing life like a leaf in a green shadow. Down the ravine behind the empty house, the cowbells follow one another into the distances of the afternoon. To my right, in a field of sunlight between two pines, the droppings of last year's horses blaze up into golden stones. I lean back as the evening darkens and comes on. A chicken hawk floats over, looking for home. I have wasted my life. I think there are strong connections between these two poems. One, the titles are similar in positioning, how they suggest the positioning of the speaker. One is sitting outside, the other one is lying in a hammock. Two, we get some similar themes shared between the two, such as nature, time, one's life, a sort of existential conundrum that they might be facing. Especially profound are the connections between us and nature. And finally, some deep levels of introspection. That is to say, each poem is attempting to excavate the thin but complicated facade that is life, each wrenching back the veil in order to reveal the gears spinning just underneath. We could especially see that level of introspection in both their last lines, that end effect we spoke about in the Elements of Poetry. Charles's, quote, the shadow that evening casts, unquote, kind of the implication of all things, and James's, I have wasted my life. How all the simple yet complex things in life are finally realized by the reader. But but is it too late? They seem to question. I believe both these texts are highly connected. Okay, let's move on to Easter 1989 in Chickamauga, Charles Wright. We're going to try to make some allusional connections to T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and to Plato, his Allegory of the Cave. So I'm going to go ahead and read Easter 1989. March is the month of slow fire. New grasses stung with rain. Cold-shouldered, white-lipped, druidic crocus circles appear, overnight morose in their purple habits. Wet cows glistening in the cut sun. Instinct will end us. The force that measles the peach tree will divest and undo us. The power that kicks on, the cells in the lilac bush, will tumble us down and down. Under the quince tree, purple across time points, and that's all right. For the time being, the willow across the back fence, menacing in its green cowl. When the full moon comes, gunning under the cloud's cassock, later tonight, the stations will start to break forth like stars, their numbers flashing, and then some. Belief is a paltry thing, and will betray us, souls loud scotched against the invisible. We are what we've always thought we were, peeling the membrane back, amazed like Jonquil's yellow head, budding the nothingness, in the wrong place, in the wrong body. The definer of all things cannot be spoken of. It is not knowledge of truth. We get no closer than next to it. Beyond wisdom, beyond denial, it asks us for nothing. According to pseudo-Dionysius, which sounds good to me, nubbly with enzymes, the hardwoods gurgle and boil in their leathery sheaths. Flame flicks, the peonies fuse. Out of the caves of their locked beings, fluorescent shapes roll the darkness aside as they rise to enter the real world. All right. There seems to be a connection Wright is making, an allusion, an homage even, to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And interestingly enough, not only in this poem, but in the beginning of the collection, on page 4, the second poem of the collection, which is an important poem, the first couple poems of a collection, they're there for a reason, to set a tone, right? The poem is an allusion as well to T.S. Eliot. The poet's title is Lines After Rereading T.S. Eliot. So there's definitely an homage and connection that Charles Wright is attempting to make to T.S. Eliot, and specifically here to The Wasteland. We can certainly see that allusion in the opening stanzas. For Easter, it's for Easter 1989. March is the month of slow fire. For T.S. Eliot, I'll go ahead and read it. It's on the right. You can see The Wasteland, the burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starburgersee. All right, so April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs, and then we get with Easter 1989, Charles Wright. March is the month of slow fire, new grasses stung with rain. So we're getting some interesting and similar imagery going on here. March with Wright and April with Eliot, both seemingly connoting some level of emotional sorrow, with words such as cold-shouldered and morose with Wright, and cruelest, dead, dull with Eliot. Both poets are accessing nature, both most notably flowers and rain. Look out for other connections Wright makes with the connection to T.S. Eliot. Now let's connect Eastern 1989 to Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Allusion as a postmodern stroke, as we already said, can also be referred to as a rhizome, defined as, especially in the postmodern world, the grand narrative or arborescence falls apart. And we said that's definitely a part of postmodernism, even in literature. The grand narratives fall apart, and we proffer or foreground the individual over the holistic. They offer instead the rhizome or fungus, which is an organism of interconnected living fibers that has no central point, no origin, and no particular form or unity or structure. A rhizome does not start from anywhere or end anywhere. It grows from everywhere and is the same at any point. As such, rhizome has no center, which makes it difficult to uproot or destroy, much in the way we view literature, in our case poetry, whereby the manifold of allusions, the many allusions, have some connections to so many artifacts from the past, but one cannot necessarily connect anything, past or present, to an original artifact. That might sound confusing. Let me clarify. That is to say, it's complicated to find the original source. So we could connect Easter 1989 to T.S. Eliot, his Wasteland. We can connect those. But what was T.S. Eliot referencing? April's the coolest month. Can we connect that further back in time, in history, to another artifact? And if you keep doing so, if you keep finding artifacts, does it reach a central artifact in the past? With regard to postmodernism, no, there is no central artifact. In this way, we can make direct and tidy connections between any of Wright's allusions to ancient Chinese poetry directly to a central text from the past. Can we do that? The answer is complicated and even convoluted, maybe even unanswerable. For Wright's sake, he is accessing many figures from the past in the first section of his collection of poetry. We know that. He is, at the same time, accessing these relevant texts from the past in order to give strength and meaning to his present work. That postmodern or rhizome effect we spoke about. Finally, we as a class, as those who decipher poetry, must remember to be highly discerning of past texts, how they move, how they maneuver, and most notably, how they inform our current text meaning. What meaning is Charles Wright attempting to infuse within his collection Chickamauga by accessing T.S. Eliot's Wasteland? What meaning, that we're going to see in a second, is Charles Wright attempting to infuse within Chickamauga by accessing Plato's Allegory of the Cave? Questions we must answer. Great topics for essays as well. Okay, so Allegory of the Cave. How do we connect Easter 1989 to Allegory of the Cave? I think there's one particular moment within the poem towards the end, towards its conclusion, that really speaks in service of its connection to the Allegory of the Cave, to Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Okay, so within Plato's Allegory of the Cave, it's revealed that there are humans chained to the wall in a cave, as we can see in this illustration on the top left, whereby they can't turn their heads to see where the shadows on the wall are being projected from or by whom. So the fettered humans are left to believe the shadows are actually real. That's their reality, the shadows they see on the wall. It's similarly to how we sort of view media when we watch TV, when we watch videos. Those are the shadows being projected on our wall, right? They have no other choice as to how to interpret their perception of reality. They must accept their own ignorance, despite not even knowing they were ignorant to the facts. In this way, their life is mediated, much in the way our own lives are mediated by television, music, videos, college, families, friends, culture, etc. I think we get a fairly strong allusion to this cave and its ability to obscure the real world in the concluding stanza of Easter 1989, and it reads, quote, "Nubbly with enzymes, their hard woods gurgle and boil in their leathery sheaths. Flame flicks the peonies fuse. Out of the caves of their locked beings, fluorescent shapes roll the darkness aside as they rise to enter the real world." And you can see here, interestingly enough, too, this center picture between the statue of Plato and the Allegory of the Cave illustration. Gosh, I found this illustration a long time ago in terms of media. You see an individual filming, right? And the camera is because reason we call it mediated. One, it's media, yes, but it interrupts. It can frame a picture any way it wants in order to communicate what it wants to communicate. Some interesting allusion that Charles Wright is making. We get the next poem after reading Tu Fu. I go outside to the dwarf orchard. What I really wanted us to be able to pull from this poem, I'm going to read it in a moment, is Wright's ability to build imagery by way of dark language, or what we could call dark motifs. After reading Tu Fu, I go outside to the dwarf orchard. East of me, west of me, full summer. How deeper than elsewhere the dusk is in your own yard. Birds fly back and forth across the lawn, looking for home. As night drifts up like a little boat. Day after day, I become less used to myself. Like the mockingbird, I flit from one thing to the next. What do I have to look forward to at 54? Tomorrow is dark. Day after tomorrow is darker still. The sky dogs are whimpering. Fireflies are dragging the hush of evening up from the damp grass. Into the world's tumult, into the chaos of every day. Go quietly, quietly. So some of the language that we get that builds the motif of darkness, of despair even. East of me, west of me, full summer, the opening line. So the west, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, right? Where the sun sets. It's typically the west is interpreted as death when mentioned in most literary texts. So we get that allusion, that connection. Two, we get words like dusk, night, dark, and evening within a fairly tight space. A gesture of how the speaker is opining, even lamenting his life as he goes through the throes of aging, posing the capital letter questions as to what it all means. What is the meaning of life? So, look, the concluding poem of the first section of Chickamauga. Looking outside the cabin window, I remember a line by Li Po. The river winds through the wilderness, Li Po said, of another place in another time. It does so here as well, sliding its cargo of dragon scales to gutter under the snuff of marsh willow and tamarack. Mid-morning, Montana high country. Jack snipe poised on the scarred fence post. Pond water stilled and smoothed out. Swallows dogfighting under the fast-moving storm clouds. Expectantly, empty, green as a pocket, the meadow waits for the wind to rise and fill it, first with a dark hand, then with the rain's loose silver, a second time, and a third, as the day dawls out its hours. Sunlight reloads and ricochets off the window glass. Behind the cloud scuts, inside the blue aorta of the sky, the river of heaven flows with a barge of stars, waiting for darkness and a place to shine. We who would see beyond seeing, see only language, that burning field. Okay, in this section's, the first section of the collection's concluding poem, its title seems to marry up nicely to the section's opening poem title, if you remember, Sitting Outside at the End of Autumn. We get sitting outside and we get looking outside. I think Wright is being highly intentional with these mirroring titles. In Sitting, the speaker is attempting to figure out the way the world operates in order to derive meaning, searching, if you remember, to answer the mathematics or arithmetic of nature and life in general, for that matter. In Looking, however, the speaker seems to have found some answers finally, especially prevalent in lines near the poem's conclusion. Quote, waiting for darkness, presumably the darkness of ignorance or unknowing, and a place to shine, presumably illumination or a type of knowing. The final stanza reads, quote, we who would see beyond seeing, see only language, that burning field, unquote. The speaker is finally able to position themselves at such a vantage point through this section's introspection in order to eventually see all is made possible, the poem seems compelled to communicate. Through language, that burning field of the brain, set ablaze by thought, it seems to connote. Okay, questions, please email me. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, I'm always there. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. A reminder, I'm postponing the open-ended question for Blackboard for May 19th today, moving it instead to May 21st. I'll email everyone when I post it to Blackboard. Reminder, Here Bullet essay is due by midnight on Tuesday, tonight, due to the Victoria Day. That was Monday. Also, commenting within the Here Bullet discussion board is due by midnight then as well. All right, let me know if you have any questions, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye.